In Alabama, it's a crime to drive while you're under the influence of marijuana. If you're accused of this, what does the prosecution have to establish? Essentially, they have to prove three things. Number one, you're driving. Frankly, that's not very difficult for them to prove because most people are pulled over as a result of some sort of traffic infraction, whether it's crossing the center line or failing to stop at a stop sign or something like that. So usually for the prosecution, establishing that you were driving isn't that hard. The second thing is that they have to prove that the person was driving and that they were under the influence of marijuana. This is a little bit harder. And sometimes it's problematic for the prosecution and sometimes they can't prove their case. But each case is fact specific, so we have to look at the facts. You know, if you said something dumb when the cop pulled you over, gee, you just caught me. I was smoking some high-grade weed before you pulled me over. That's probably enough. If you are pulled over and there's, a smoldering joint in the ashtray, probably enough. So they look at the specifics of each case and what was said or done. The third element, though, is that they have to prove not only that you were smoking marijuana or that you had consumed marijuana, but that the marijuana in your system was enough to affect your ability to safely operate that motor vehicle. In other kinds of cases, like DUI, there's a bright line test that we sometimes use. For example, in a driving under the influence, if you have a certain level of alcohol in your system, it's presumed, or at least it's an evidentiary level of proof that they can use to establish that you are, in fact, under the influence of alcohol. That doesn't apply with marijuana. In other words, there's not a specific level of tetrahydrocannabinoid that has to be in your blood to establish it. So as to that, we don't really have standards. It's a little bit of the Wild West in that respect. So going back to the original question, how do they prove that somebody was under the influence of marijuana to the extent they couldn't safely operate that motor vehicle? There's no specific test. They look at a variety of things. For example, again, if you're there and you say something dumb to the cop like, "Oh, gee, officer, I was just waiting for that stop sign to turn green." Wait a second. Cop's going to say, well, things aren't quite functioning up top. There's some sort of a disconnect, and they would use that as circumstantial evidence that the person was driving while under the influence of marijuana. They might bring in what's known as a DRE, or drug recognition expert. Those are police officers who have training in recognizing certain drugs. And he'd testify things like, well, gee, his pupils were dilated, the eyes were red and bloodshot, there was jerkiness to his pupils. Based on my training and experience, he was under the influence of marijuana. Now, whether or not that evidence gets in depends on both the skill of the prosecutor and the officer offering the testimony, as well as the skill and ability of your lawyer in trying to keep it out. So what do you do if you're charged with driving under the influence of alcohol? Obviously, if you're smart, you're going to call a lawyer. Of course, if you want our help, give us a call. Our phone number's below. I hope you found this video to be educational and informative. Thank you for watching.